Assalamualaikum. So this is the video presentation for chapter 6, activity-based costing. So activity-based costing is the continuation of the overhead that we have discussed in the previous video. So what is the difference? What are the differences between traditional method and activity-based costing? Okay, so traditional method refers to the one that we have done in chapter 5, in which we calculate the overhead absorption rate based on the total overhead that we have reapportioned from service center to cost center. Okay, the problem with this method is that when the company absorb the overhead using the labor hour, total labor hour, the absorption of the overhead may not be accurate because the modern manufacturing process use less direct labors and more automated machine. Okay, so if the company absorb their overhead using the direct labor hour, then the total cost per unit may be understated. Okay, so if overhead absorption rate used direct labor hours as volume or basis of absorption, in the cost centers that use more machine rather than labor, then the overhead cost may be under absorbed when we want to determine the cost per unit. So the more current method in absorbing the overhead is called activity-based costing. So in this method, we no longer use direct labor to calculate absorption rate because one, manufacturing process becomes more automated, meaning that the company use less labor and depends more on machines. Second, we need to find a different basis of absorption or different volume of absorption. Because if you still remember in chapter 5, we have 6 methods of absorptions. Okay, either we use the machine hour or direct labor hour or prime cost or direct material value and such on and more. But under activity-based costing, our method of absorption is more specific on the machinery aspect, where we use absorption methods such as machine setups, quality inspections, or purchase order to more accurately absorb our overhead. The new basis of absorption is suitable for manufacturing or cost center that uses more automated machine than direct labors. Therefore, the overhead can now be more accurately absorbed into the product. So how do we calculate overhead using the activity-based costing? So before we can start calculating the overhead, you need to know certain terms, okay, such as you need to know what is cost pool. So cost pool is like cost center. It means that the overhead that we have accumulated, we will try to group or to categorize the overhead that maybe share the same cost driver. So what is cost driver? So cost driver is the cost that generates the overhead. The cost, the reasons why we have to pay for that overhead. For example, let's say that our cost pool, the cost pool is activity or packaging our final goods. Okay, packaging activity overhead. So this is cost pool. Okay, so why does we incur this kind of cost pool? Is based on number of container that we use. It means that the more we have, the more we use the containers, the higher is the packaging activity overhead. Okay, so therefore packaging activity is the cost pool and the total number of container used is the cost driver. Okay, if we use more cost driver, then it will result in packaging activity to become higher and higher. So by knowing the cost driver, we can calculate the activity based overhead rate. So this is like overhead absorption rate, yeah? Exactly like overhead absorption rate, OAR, except this is the absorption rate for each of the cost pool. Okay, if you still recall chapter 5, when we calculate OAR, it is for the purpose of one department. One department has one OAR. Okay, but for the activity-based costing, we will have the absorption rate for each of the cost pool. So once we have determined the ABOR or the activity-based overhead rate, then we can calculate the total production for each of the cost, for total overhead for each of the product that we produce. Okay, so to make it clearer, in January 2018, CSR Technophone Sdn Bhd specializes in production of smartphones called SAS and SAD. Products are currently sold at 1,500 and 1,900 ringgit respectively. Currently, the company is using traditional costing system based on direct labor hours. So they give you the information relating to the production costs, which are the direct material and the direct labor for SAS and SAD. And then they say that further details on the analysis of production overhead are provided below. So they give you these are all overhead. Yeah, these are all overhead, but the company has identified 4 types of overhead that they usually incur to produce both of the products. So the 4 types of overhead that they have identified here is what we call as cost pool, where the cost has been pooled according to their purposes. Okay. And these are the cost driver that drive the cost pool. It means that the higher is the number of order, the higher will be the purchasing overhead cost. Okay. And for assembly, the cost driver is the direct labor hours. So the higher is the direct labor hour, the higher would be the assembling overhead. Okay, and then we have the packaging, distribution, number of unit produced, and quality checking, number of inspections. And then they give you the total overhead for each of the cost pool. And these are the number of cost driver each of the product has used. For example, like SAS has 3,600 number of order, while SAD has 1,400 number of order. Okay, so it says here direct labor hour required for each project SAS and SAD are 4 hours and 5 hours respectively. So why do they give this information? Is because on requirement number 4, they ask you to compare the traditional costing system with the ABC system. Okay, so the traditional means when we calculate overhead later on, we're going to use the OAR. So the first requirement, they ask you to calculate the activity-based overhead rate, the ABOR. So this is how we calculate the ABOR or the activity-based overhead rate. Okay, so these are our 4 cost pool just now, and these are the cost driver. So this is the total overhead for each of the cost pool. And here we have the cost driver used by the product SAS and the cost driver used by the product SAD. So when you want to calculate the ABOR or the ABOR, okay, we must divide the cost pool overhead with the total of cost driver. And ABOR is calculated by dividing cost pool overhead with total cost driver. So in this case, 60 ringgit per number of order is calculated by dividing 300,000 with 5,000 number of order. So the cost per order is 60 ringgit. Okay, direct labor hour also. How do we calculate 10 ringgit and 50 cent per direct labor hour? Is we divide 630,000 with 60,000 labor hours. So you should get 10 ringgit and 50 cent. 12 ringgit 70 cent for the packaging and distribution, and 24 ringgit per number of inspection when we want to calculate the overhead for the quality checking. So once we have the ABOR, we can assign the overhead for each of the product. Yeah, so here for SAS, the overhead for purchasing cost pool is 60 ringgit times with the 3,600 ringgit. So the overhead for purchasing cost pool for product SAS is 216 ringgit. For SAD is 1,400 number of order times with the 60 ringgit per number of order. You should get 84,000 ringgit. So we calculate continuously for the assembling, packaging and quality checking. And we should get the total overhead for product SAS to be at 564,520 and for product SAD to be at 717,280. Okay, then we can calculate the overhead per product. Yeah, so what is the overhead per product for product SAS? Is 56 ringgit and 45 cents. So where do we get the 10,000? This is we get from the question. Yeah? The question says that we have produced 10,000 units of product SAS and we have produced 16,000 units of product SAD. So overhead per unit for product SAS is 56 ringgit and 45 cents. Overhead per unit for product SAD is 44 ringgit and 83 cents. Next, I ask you to compare the overhead using the ABC with the overhead using the traditional method. Okay, so for the traditional method, we just simply take the total overhead here, the total overhead here, divide by our absorption method. So in this case, the question says that the company absorbed their overhead traditionally using the direct labor hour, just like what we did in chapter 5. Exactly what we did in chapter 5. So we divide by total direct labor hour, which is 60,000 hours. Okay, so we get the OAR or the overhead absorption rate to be at 21 ringgit and 36 cents for per direct labor hour. Okay, so in the question they also given you that the cost, the production cost incurred for each of the product. They've given you the information that direct material is 250 ringgit for product SAS, direct material for SAD is 350 ringgit. Okay, so we calculate then the direct labor. The total given to you here is 40 ringgit. Okay, but we know that the rate per hour is 10 ringgit. So the company used 4 direct labor hour to produce one product SAS. So when we want to absorb the overhead, okay, we absorb using the direct labor. So if the company has used 4 hours here, so when we absorb the overhead, so we absorb at 4 hours as well. Okay, by multiplying 21 ringgit 36 cents with 4 hours for product SAS, so you should get 85 ringgit 44 cents of overhead and 106 ringgit 80 cents for overhead of product SAD. So the production cost, the cost per unit of SAS is 375 ringgit and 44 cents for SAS and 531 ringgit of 80 cents for product SAD. Okay, labor overhead is absorbed using direct labor hour used to produce one product. So we compare. We compare traditional with the ABC method. So traditional methods show us that we have absorbed SAS at 85 ringgit and SAD at 106 ringgit. Whereas if we use activity-based costing, the absorption is more accurate, yeah, because we only absorb at 56 ringgit and 45 cent for each of the product. Yeah, so we can clearly see that the overhead is over-absorbed using the traditional method because the company is relying more on machine rather than labor. Yeah, because the company do not have as much labor as they thought that they have. And that's why they have over-absorbed their overhead. So we go further into illustration. We go to June 2019, question 4b. Okay, the information below relates to the two products, Sandy and Q, that will be featured by company named Daiko. So as usual, they give you the prime cost to produce Sandy and to produce Q. Yeah, this is the prime cost here. And then they give you the information about the overhead. The new accountant of the company has submitted a proposal to adopt activity-based costing. The following information relates to the overhead costs attached to each activity. So these are the cost pool that the company has identified with the estimated overhead. Okay, and these are the cost drivers and the cost driver used by each of the product. Okay, as usual, they will ask you to calculate first the ABOR, the activity-based overhead rate, and then they ask you to calculate production cost per unit for Sandy, only for Sandy using the activity-based costing system. Okay, so as usual, you need to identify first the ABOR. Okay, you found your overhead, total overhead for each of the cost pool, and then you have found the total cost driver for both of the products. So you divide cost pool with the total cost driver. So you get 4 ringgit and 60 cent per direct labor hour for assembly, 47 ringgit per setup for machine, 12 ringgit per customer order, and 2 ringgit per supplier order. Okay, once you have your ABOR, you can calculate the overhead for product Sandy. Yeah, by multiplying 4 ringgit and 60 cent with the 20,000 labor hour that Sandy has used to produce the product. So the overhead for assembly for product Sandy is 83,200 ringgit. Okay, and then you can calculate the rest of the overhead for product Sandy, and you should get the total overhead to be at 472 ringgit and 472,200 ringgit. Okay, so you can then calculate the overhead cost per unit or overhead cost per Sandy by dividing the number of production with 5,000. So you should get the overhead per unit is 94 ringgit and 44 cent. Okay, so the question asks you to calculate the total cost per unit to produce 1 Sandy. So you put in first your prime cost, which consists of direct material 80 ringgit, direct labor 50 ringgit, and then you add on with your overhead per unit that you've calculated previously. So you get the cost to produce 1 Sandy is 189 ringgit and 44 cent. Okay, the similar method we're going to use for June 2018. Yeah, Sinmax manufactures two products, premium and deluxe. The standard direct wage rate to produce both products is 10 ringgit per direct labor hour, and the OAR is 25 ringgit per direct labor hour. So they give you the production cost to produce one premium and production cost to produce one deluxe. Okay, so they have produced 2,500 units of premium and 4,500 units of deluxe. And then they give you the prime cost accordingly with the machine hour used for each of the product. Okay, the management accountant who has studied the use of activity-based costing has estimated that the company's overhead is 637,500 ringgit. Okay, so I mean that if you add up all these, the total here, you should get back at 67,500 ringgit. So these are the cost pool together with the estimated overhead for each of the cost pool together with the cost driver. The company has also stated that 400 orders have been processed and the order ratio is 3:2 between premium and deluxe. So later on, when you want to find the cost driver for product premium and product deluxe, so you should divide. And then while 10,000 hours of inspection were spent for both products at a proportion of 20% for premium and the remaining for deluxe. So later on you divide, you appropriate the inspection number, 20% goes to the premium, 80% goes for deluxe. Okay, so the question asks you to calculate the ABOR together with the cost per unit for product deluxe only. And then based on the answer above, advise the company whether the traditional method has overstated or understated the cost. It's the cost of product deluxe. Support your answer with calculations. Okay, as usual, when you want to calculate the ABOR, you find the total cost, overhead, total cost pool for the overhead, divide by total cost drivers. So 42,000 divided by 7,000, you should get 6 ringgit here. And then you go calculate the same for order processing, machine processing, and product inspections. Okay, once you have the ABOR, you can calculate the overhead for product deluxe, yeah, by multiplying 6 ringgit with the number of cost driver for deluxe. So you should get 27,000 here, 38,200, 225,000, 80,000, and the total overhead for product deluxe is 370,200 ringgit. So you divide by number of production. So you should get cost per unit for product deluxe is 82 ringgit and 27 cent. Okay. So then you can compare between the two methods here. Okay, the traditional method and the activity-based method. Okay, so how do I get the 100 ringgit of the overhead for traditional method? For direct labor hour is 40 ringgit for one product. Okay, and the question stated that 1 hour we pay our labor 10 ringgit. So it means that to produce one product of one product of deluxe, the company has to use 4 hours of direct labor hour. Okay, so if the OAR is 25 ringgit per direct labor hour, the company use 4 hours to complete one product. Therefore, the overhead is 100 ring. Okay, and it should derive you to the total cost per unit to be at 180 ringgit. Yeah, as compared to activity-based costing, the cost per unit is only 162 ringgit and 27 cent. So you have to conclude your calculation by saying that traditional costing system has overstated the cost of deluxe by 70 ringgit and 73 cent. So that's the end of chapter 6. And as usual, please do the rest of the questions. And we're going to discuss this in online class next week. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.